we're going to start the prepping, mixing process, that kind of thing, okay? One of the hardest things about sourdough is reading your sourdough starter and knowing when it's ready, okay? So you can see that when we started with our feedings, it was down here and it's up here now, okay? We want to hit it when it's at its peak, not necessarily when it's rose, but when it's ready to eat again, kind of thing. And we do our feedings 24 hours, every 24 hours kind of thing. But typically your starter is going to be ready after you've fed it at around about 12-ish hours, okay? But I've taken that guesswork and that kind of thing out of this recipe. If I gave you a recipe, or if you're just beginning and you come across this video for whatever reason, I've taken that guesswork out, because a lot of recipes will tell you, hey, when your starter's ready, do such and such, okay? But as a beginner, you're not going to know, what do you mean, when is my starter ready, okay? So in this recipe, I've done that guesswork for you, so just follow along. I'm going to try to have the recipe in the link below as a PDF for other people to upload, in case you're stumbling across this for the first time, okay? But we're ready to start mixing. This recipe is from Ballerina Farm. I've tailored it a little bit because I live in a humid climate, but it makes a double batch. So consider using a very, very large bowl that you have for mixing. You're gonna want your scale, again, that can do grams, something to stir with. This is what is recommended, and I'm not gonna say you can't stir without it. I did the first couple batches without, and then I was like, yes, I want to get into sourdough more, so I'm sticking with it. So then I got some better tools, okay? You're gonna need 1,000 grams of flour. Now, you saw me in feeding the starter, I use King Arthur's bread flour. When it comes to mixing the ingredients for making the actual bread, I use 800 grams of the bread flour, and I use 200 grams of just a regular all-purpose unbleached flour, okay? But you literally can just make the recipe with 1,000 grams of regular flour. Just make sure it's unbleached, okay? You can use rye flour, 500 grams, and whatever other kind of flour you want, okay? But you need 1,000 grams for this recipe. Now, I personally have never cut this recipe in half because we eat so much sourdough, and I love to be able to make a batch, which makes a double, 2 loaves, and be able to hand one to someone else, okay? So for me, this works well, making a double batch. I've even done 2 of these, making 4 loaves, okay? And then you're gonna need some purified water, okay? Again, I talked about that in the last video. Water is one of the biggest ingredients in this recipe, and it matters what kind of water you use. So please, yes, people have gotten away with using tap water, but if you want a really good taste, you want a really good rise out of your bread and those kinds of things, you want it to look decent in the end product and taste decent, use purified water. And you're gonna need 700 grams of that, so that's a lot. So make sure you have that on hand, and it has to be warm water. It can't be too hot and it can't be too cold, like we talked about in the last video, okay? And so remember, we started with 30-ish grams. Now we're going to be able to have 200 grams of this starter in the bowl, and probably have around 30 grams left over so that you can keep going if you want, or just put it into your discard starter jar in the fridge, okay? All right, so let's get mixing. All right, so the first step is to put 200 grams of starter into the bowl. It's gonna be pretty sticky. That's fairly normal. All right, that's 195. Probably around there. And again, there's a lot of grace involved in it. Like if you had 199 and you're like, oh, that's all I have, that's totally fine. Or even if you had, 3 to 5 grams over, not a ginormous deal. Like right now I'm at 205, and I'm just gonna leave it like that. All right, so we have our 200 grams of starter in there. And the next thing that we're gonna do is pour our 700 grams of water. Now this part I am picky about because I live in a very humid environment. And when I first started making this a year ago, I followed the recipe to a T and it never turned out. I followed 3 recipes and they never turned out. And I didn't know if it was me that was doing something wrong or what. And I later discovered that when you live in a humid environment, you have to decrease the water up to 10%, okay? So I have tailored this and I am very careful to make sure I get the exact amount that I'm looking for in here so that it is not too runny and it's still usable, okay? So we'll zero our scale out and we're looking for 700 grams of water. Right, 701. I'm not gonna split hairs over 1 gram, so we'll be good there. All right, so let's go to the next step. All right, so now we're gonna take our clean hands and we're going to mix this, the leaven into the water until it's milky and almost completely mixed. Sometimes the starter can be a little bit chunky. Try to work those chunks out with your hand, otherwise when you pour in the flour it gets really clumpy, okay? So you're just going to keep mixing like this and kind of squishing between your hands, that kind of thing, until it is properly mixed. All right, so as you can see, this is looking like a frothy milk kind of thing. There's no clumps left. It's pretty fairly evenly mixed. So we're going to place it back onto our scale, zero it out, and then it's going to be time to mix our flour in, okay? And like I said, I use, the majority of mine is King Arthur's bread flour. So I use 800 grams of King Arthur's bread flour. So I'm going to put that in. We're about 600 right now. Remember, the goal is 1,000, so you can do whatever you want. All right, I'm at 810, okay? And I don't have to split hairs over that, like I said. So I'm just gonna finish off the 1,000 grams with my regular flour. We're at 985. All right. There's our 1,002 grams, okay? Again, not worth splitting hairs over. And now I'm going to just mix it with this until it's all the way mixed. All right, so once it's all completely mixed, it should look like this. It should be pretty tacky and sticky to touch. And we're literally just going to place a lid on it of some sort. You can use a dish towel, whatever, just to kind of loosely cover it. We don't want to seal it completely, but to loosely cover it. And it's going to sit on the counter for 20 minutes. All right, so our dough has been sitting here on the counter for 20 minutes with the lid on it. Now for the next step, you're going to need sea salt, more water, just a little bit of water. And again, I keep my measuring spoons close by because if I go over in the water, I'm going to spoon the water out. Okay, so we're gonna just place our dough back onto the scale, zero it out, and we're looking for 28 grams of sea salt. $28 grams right there. All right, now we're gonna zero our scale out again, and we're looking for 20 grams of water. The original recipe from Ballerina Farm calls for 750 grams total. 700 when mixing, 50 grams water at this part. But because I live in a humid location, I have to figure it out as I go depending on what season we're in. So I've been doing 15 grams while we were in the middle of summer. Now that it's, you know, November, fall, it's not as humid, but it is still moist out. So I'm going to do between 20 and 25 grams of water. It comes fast, so you gotta pour really, really slow. And I pour in one section, that way in case I need to spoon it out, I can. All right, so there's 21 grams of water. And so after that, all we're gonna do is take our clean hands and just kind of pinch it, you know, massage the water and the sea salt into the dough until we feel like it's got a proper mix to it. And after you're done with that, you're just going to place the lid right back on it and let it sit for a half hour, and then I'll show you what to do next.